So nice to be here with you. Um, Today, for our metta session, um, I wanted to continue the really beautiful, heartfelt talk that Krister shared with us yesterday. It was really deeply moving. And one of the reasons I was reflecting on the way that you teach Krister and the way that you show up with your example is that the metta that you're sharing and the compassion that you're sharing, it's really simple, right? It's not complicated. It's not heady. It's pretty easy to feel and connect with. And you pointed us so beautifully to that yesterday, Krister. So thank you. Um, and everyone has their own expression of that metta and that compassion. Every single one of us has that um, the Buddha-like compassion, this innate humanness that we have this ability to connect with people through our heart, and we show it differently in different ways, and that makes it even more special. So I wanted to share a little bit about compassion with you all today, and hopefully keeping it simple. Because compassion or karuna in Pali it's a feeling. It's a feeling of the heart, and it's really simple. It's really direct, and it's immediately beneficial. Karuna is, or compassion is simply metta, but in the face of suffering. So when we experience stress in our life, or when we experience loss or grief, when we notice others in our life or in the world experiencing loss or grief or suffering, metta is simply karuna is simply metta, but with this understanding and accommodating this suffering. So it's very, very similar, and that's why karuna is also one of the four Brahma Viharas. It is it is another facet to this awakened heart, very related. The only difference really is the object of what we're considering when we're bringing karuna to our mind. And compassion, the reason I was like thinking and looking and feeling into how it exists, right? How is this possible for compassion to exist? Compassion is a heart, a mind that does not suffer. We talked about metta being this unconditional, positive regard. And compassion is that same mind, just withholding suffering. So compassion is itself not suffering. And that's really important to say because it's very easy when we encounter suffering in our own heart, mind, or with others that we can think that we have to suffer in order to feel compassion, and that's not true. Compassion alleviates suffering. It holds suffering. It acknowledges it. It's present with it, but it itself is not suffering. And this is important because compassion doesn't suffer because it knows that freedom is possible. If if freedom wasn't possible, if freedom from suffering wasn't possible, compassion wouldn't exist. We would only despair around suffering. But yet, this awakened heart of compassion is brave and resilient and courageous in the face of suffering because it knows that healing is possible and that freedom and liberation is possible. Of course, this is why the Buddha taught. He taught because he, in his own direct experience, saw and understood the causes of suffering and that freedom was possible. So, out of compassion, he decided to teach. And when he was teaching, when he was teaching the Dhamma and teaching out of compassion, he was not suffering. So we can practice compassion, and it's exactly the fact that compassion is not suffering that helps us understand what suffering is and how it's different than compassion. So compassion, Stephen was talking about craving and aversion earlier in the retreat, and how they're really two sides of the same coin. And I really love that because it might display outwardly more as craving or as aversion, but really they go hand in hand. And with compassion, it's similar in this analogy. Compassion is the other side of the coin of insight or wisdom or panya. And the reason why is going back to this idea that compassion knows that liberation is possible. So it sees the freedom in the present moment to be with what's unpleasant or uncomfortable or difficult and remains free. So it is an aspect of wisdom. Two sides of the same coin. And it also has the same function as wisdom. Compassion's function is to not get rid of suffering, right? That would be aversion, trying to get rid of something. Compassion seeks to understand suffering. And that's the same function of wisdom, right? We uproot the hindrances and we decondition them through understanding, through being with them and looking at them closely, understanding their causes and conditions. And compassion also simply seeks to understand the suffering that's present. And this is so helpful to understand compassion because, and again, going back to what Krister said yesterday, he had so many like amazing gems. I'm playing off you. We can tag team these, Krister. Um, is that, metta and compassion, these Brahma Viharas, because they are seeking to understand, they don't necessarily try to fix. They don't say, oh, your suffering's a problem. I got to get rid of this. And that can also be a really common misunderstanding of what compassion is. We think, oh, I have to manage this suffering. I have to get rid of it. I have to, all right, well, that's enough suffering now. But compassion seeks to understand it by being with it, not trying to solve it. And we've all experienced suffering um, in our life. That's why we're at this retreat, partly, probably. And we know when we've been with people in our life who've just sat with us, who listened to us, didn't try to solve our problem, didn't necessarily give us advice. They just sat with us through the loss or through the grief or through the pain. That was enough. That compassion was enough, right? A lot of time we recognize that we can't necessarily do anything, quote unquote, do anything to fix the problem or for of what's happened in our life that we feel loss or grief over. We can't bring people back. We can't undo what's done. We can't rewind time. But we can be with it. And compassion is very radical because it shows us that freedom comes through letting go and letting things be, yet again, even with the most difficult things that pop up in our life. So compassion is with suffering, being with it, trying to understand it. And compassion, it creates this space in our heart and mind so that we can be with things that are really challenging. That space is so important. We create that space with our mindfulness and with the awakening factors, but with the wholesome, with the kusala mind states, it creates space in our heart so that we're not overwhelmed by the suffering. So we don't start to identify with the suffering or identify with the hindrances. Compassion is an open heart. It's an open heart, and that space allows us to be really present with what we're feeling and what's coming up for us and what other people are experiencing. So that space is really important. Again, it's not really necessarily doing anything other than just being spacious and open with what's here. And as I mentioned, like, well, why would we do this, right? Why would we be open to things that are painful in life? And you know, partly it's because for two reasons, right? First reason is because in some sorrow, we've tried everything else. We've tried, all the addictions, that we've tried all the ways of distracting ourselves and running away from our suffering. Doesn't help. And we've tried trying to tinker with it and fix it and improve ourself, and that doesn't work. All the self-help doesn't work. And we can't ignore it and we can't run from it. So really, compassion is wisdom to show this is the last door at the end of the hallway, right? The Four Noble Truths, the last door at the end of the hallway, something that we haven't tried yet, or that we're learning to try, to develop the bravery and the compassion to walk through that door. Say, okay, I'm going to turn towards the suffering. Compassion turns towards our suffering and pain. And there's that famous quote by Robert Frost, which I really like, which gives me courage when I'm experiencing pain or difficulty. And he says that the only way out is through, right? We can't get out of suffering. There's no special get out of suffering free card. We have to go through it. We have to understand it. We have to learn from it. It's teaching us something important that we need to see about how or why it's arising. And this is a blessing, right? At the time, it feels like everything but that. It seems like it's the worst thing happening in the world. But when we go through it, when we're on the other side, we realize, oh, this was what I needed. And these experiences that we have with suffering, they actually, because we eventually, sooner or later, we turn towards them, especially because we've been called on this retreat and called to the Dhamma. And suffering experiences shape our understanding of what Dhamma is. Because the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, suffering is what the Buddha said. He teaches two things: suffering and the cessation of suffering. So suffering is so integral into and understanding it is the Buddhist path, right? It literally is the path. The obstacle is the path. Suffering is the path. And so through our understanding of our suffering, we understand the Dhamma. And we understand all types of things, all types of things. We understand that one thing that I was reflecting on in this retreat is how it's already like the fourth day. Time is going by, right? Life is very short. And, we acknowledge that as part of our understanding that life is precious. It's easily lost. We have people in our life who we've lost. Either they've moved away or maybe they've passed away. That suffering that we experienced through that loss, that taught us, okay, this life is precious. This is short. I don't want to waste this opportunity distracting myself. I want to engage in this path to understand the suffering. I want to understand where the freedom is in this life. Suffering motivates us to practice. It brings us to practice. it encourages us and kind of guides us, it scoots us along to say, okay, it's time to practice now, right? Well, it's time to show up. So suffering is a blessing because without it, without acknowledging it, we wouldn't have the opportunity to find liberation and freedom and real sources of happiness, not just distraction. So, when we go through difficulty, my one friend pointed out that sometimes it can be bitter medicine. It can be very, very challenging. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we asked for. But it's what we needed. It's what we needed in the time. It's what we needed now. And taking that as an opportunity, seeing that suffering as opportunity, we change our relationship to it and we open to the truth that is embedded within the suffering. There is truth there. There is truth in the fact that life is short, that we won't live forever. There is truth in the fact that we get sick, that we won't have an able body forever. Yes, it's difficult to acknowledge that, but we do have to, because if we don't, we suffer. And when we do acknowledge it, we find the wisdom in it. We find the truth in it. There is truth in suffering. And so I like to think that even with all the difficulty that we might experience in life, that the universe is conspiring for our awakening. Literally, everything is showing us how to wake up and be present more fully in life, more and more fully, more deeply, more heartfelt, more present, with less resistance, with a greater heart, with greater compassion. Compassion helps us do that. It helps us meet that suffering so we can find the truth that life is showing us to wake up to. So compassion is a refuge. It is a source of peace. It's a source of understanding. It's a source of being able to alchemize the suffering, the bitterness of the medicine, of the loss, of the grief. Compassion is the sugar that makes the medicine go down, right? And just like with all the other Brahma Viharas, it's completely limitless. We can never stop developing our compassion, and it's we never we don't have to ever feel like, oh, we're spending too much time on compassion for ourselves or for other people. It is immeasurable. It is boundless. So we can really lean into this practice as a cultivation, as something we can continue to perfect as a quality of the kusala. And this transmuting that compassion does, I just love this, right? Because compassion, again, is not suffering. It's different. Compassion isn't the suffering. So compassion transmutes our suffering actually into this wisdom, into the happiness. And Thich Nhat Hanh, he's just such an amazing, he was such an amazing teacher, just in every way, in his example, in his life, in his practice, in his teachings. And he has this quote, it's just so simple, but it points to this transmutation with compassion from suffering into happiness. He says, "No mud, no lotus." Right? I love it. So eloquent. Being a Zen practitioner, it's just the poetry and holding up this flower for us through his life and through that quote. No mud, no lotus. Right? So freedom and happiness is actually inseparable, and as he says, deeply interconnected with suffering. The mud creates the conditions for the lotus to bloom. The suffering in our life creates the conditions for us to turn towards it with compassion and have our awakened heart bloom and open. So again, this suffering is a good thing. It awakens our heart. It's the soil for our awakening. And in MIDL, we we go through this process of letting go through looking at our relationship to things, right? Especially when and later in MIDL, we start deconditioning our past painful memories or um, our past hurts or things that have triggered us in the past. We decondition the unpleasant worldly Vedana through letting go. We tune into the softening through the releasing, a letting go of the aversion towards that unpleasantness, and we find equanimity, we find peace. And we can also do that with compassion. Compassion is the alchemizer, right? So we when we encounter, we don't have to necessarily bring up suffering right now. I'm sure there's plenty of it around that we could notice in our world or in our heart. But when we encounter suffering, when we bring compassion to that suffering, it's like we're letting go of the unpleasant Vedana of that suffering, and we're annealing it. We're connecting it with the pleasant, wholesome Vedana of compassion. And that's where the healing happens. We don't suddenly forget that the bad thing happened or is happening to us, or the thing that we didn't want is happening, or that we didn't get what we wanted. That's still there. It's still there. We're still going to get sick. We're still probably, going to encounter loss. We're still going to pass away. We're still going to have to go through that process. We're going to still have to see that happen to our loved ones. But when we bring compassion to those difficult situations, we create new relationships of wholesomeness with it. And we see that we don't have to suffer. We can bloom, our heart can bloom into compassion, and we can find refuge in with the difficulty and connect it with this wholesome heart of compassion to open to this experience that life is showing up. And so it's like, okay, now we have choice. We have this ability to say, okay, I don't want to suffer. Nobody wants to suffer. But yet I can't escape old age, sickness, and death. So what are we to do? We meet it. We meet it with this compassion, and we don't have to suffer. We can take that suffering and transform it into deepening these kusala qualities, this source of happiness, the sources of refuge for ourselves, and then we can share that with other people when they're going through difficulty. Again, we don't have to solve their problem. We can't make people not encounter loss, but we can be with them through that compassion, give them respite, share with them in community, and really create opportunity to integrate that difficult experience into wisdom, into opportunity. And as we do this for ourselves, we get better and better at it. We suffer less and less. We grow. Our heart continues to open. And I've been experiencing this where I open my heart and I'm like, oh, wow, this is so nice. I can't believe my heart is this full. And then, you think, oh, I'm not going to suffer anymore or whatever. And then something happens. It's like, oh no, suffering's back again, right? This other thing, this new pain in my life, this new loss. Oh, okay. Okay, bring new compassion to it. And then you didn't think it was possible, but your heart breaks open even more and gets even bigger. And so it's this process, almost like like a flower. I don't know if you've seen like a time lapse of a dahlia flower. Um, it's I have a loved one and their favorite flower is a dahlia, And so I was looking at pictures of dahlias and painting them because I'm an artist and drawing them. And I saw this time-lapse video of a dahlia. And right before it blooms, it contracts. So it contracts and then blooms open more. And then it contracts and then it blooms open even bigger. And it just keeps doing that. And I find that this is the process of compassion, right? Our heart breaks so that it can open more. And you think it's open, and then it breaks again so that it can open even more. And this opening of the heart allows us to hold space for people and suffering from people that we might not even know, like people around the world. We know, especially intellectually, that there is extreme suffering in the world. There's hunger, war, genocide, like physical, real physical suffering. A lot of it being man-made. And then there's the emotional suffering of those in the world, close to us, but yet far. So this breaking of our heart and reopening, it creates more space so that we can hold more beings in our heart of compassion. So we start off with our own suffering, and through opening to it, we develop this capacity to open to greater suffering and feel like these depths of this compassion that we didn't even realize is possible, and that connects all of humanity. It connects all living beings. And it's this process that we can cultivate. And again, the Buddha said that there are countless living beings. So we can just develop this, continue to constantly develop this immeasurable compassion. There's no limit to what it can grow. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see how my heart breaks and continues to open, because it will ultimately lead to greater happiness. Not suffering, it will lead to greater happiness, greater compassion. So, and we need this in the world. We really need this compassion. We need this because there's just still so much suffering. There's still so much opportunity for people to experience freedom, for our own freedom. So we really do need this. And compassion, when we have that, we're developing this practice, it's very skillful, right? Compassion is creative because it's so open. Compassion can find solutions when it's necessary because it's focusing, it orients to the freedom that's possible, not to the necessarily to the problem. It doesn't contract around the problem. It opens to the possibility of freedom through letting go and being with. And it's very practical, right? We can, there's this analogy that when the Buddha was teaching and the Buddha went, he could go to different realms of beings within the idea that in samsara there's different realms. This idea that Buddha could go to the heaven realm or he could go to a hell realm. And there's this analogy that when the Buddha went to the hell realm, he brought water because that was the most practical, beneficial, compassionate thing that a being like the Buddha would bring to a hell realm, right? So we don't necessarily have to go into all our relationship with compassion saying, Hirgi, Hirgi, I have the compassion bell I'm ringing. Like, let me teach you Dhamma. Right? It doesn't necessarily, not every situation calls for us sharing Dhamma with people, right? It might call for water. It might call for hug. It might call for someone just to listen. It might call for advice. But whatever it is, there'll be space and freedom in our heart and mind to meet whatever is present. So it's flexible, it's practical, and it's very, very skillful. So I do want to meditate, but I do want to share this one last piece because as an insight meditator, I'm very interested in wisdom and how compassion plays with wisdom. So I just wanted to share a little bit more about that before we meditate. And I realized with my own suffering that compassion and the suffering brings me to the practice, and compassion enables it to be bearable and enables me to be open to the suffering. And once that space is there, we have opportunity for curiosity, to investigate. So compassion creates that space so that wisdom can come in and understand. Compassion and wisdom being the same, right? So I like this idea that a lot of us come to the practice because of suffering in our life, because either we or others or people around us, we are experiencing suffering. But once we're in the practice, we continue to stay here, even when our suffering has begun to decrease. And I like this, I kind of came up with this catchphrase I liked that I want to share with you. It's that compassion brought me to the practice, but the curiosity invited me to stay and continue to learn. So with compassion, we begin to investigate the causes and conditions that give rise to suffering. Again, because suffering is dependent arising, because there are conditions that support it, if we investigate it, we can find the ways that it can cease. That's why the Buddha taught the Dhamma. So we can begin to see the ways that we're holding on to things or creating identity that contributes to suffering. And I wanted to share two that I thought were kind of interesting. One is that Stephen Snyder, he's a Zen Buddhist teacher. He has some amazing books, and I really respect him. He's a Theravadan teacher as well. And he pointed out something when I read his book, and I started to investigate and was like, oh yeah, this is really interesting. This is really true. We're looking at the causes of suffering. I want to see this. He says, when we begin sustained karuna or compassion practice, we begin to see that we have a self-image. And one of them can be that we have this young, pure, innocent self-image that we present to others and to ourselves, thinking that I'm the perfect one and that others are the source of my pain. And we do this as a defense mechanism, right? There's this little perfect person inside me that doesn't do anything wrong. And I find this really interesting because when we are confronted with our own suffering and we look closely, we see that grasping and holding on to this idea that I can't cause harm to myself or others actually because I'm perfect or because I'm the pure one actually perpetuates harm and suffering in the world. And so it's important to look at our own defilements, our own delusions, so that not to chastise or blame ourselves, but so that we can be compassionate and understand where perhaps we are creating suffering for ourselves or other people. It is an act of compassion to not cause harm, right? Compassion is an act, when we bring compassion into the world, it's a practice of morality and sila. So we want to recognize that we do have the potential to create harm and suffering in our world, partly through these delusions and through grasping at certain self-views. And we don't want to just assume that we can't cause harm. We want to acknowledge that we do have this possibility of creating potentially more problems in the world. And when we acknowledge that, it's really true. It's based in truth. And again, it's a hard truth saying like, okay, yeah, I'm not perfect. But by doing that, we create opportunities to like really act out of compassion, act out of sila and harmony, being mindful and conscientious about how our words and our actions affect people. So that's one aspect of like investigating into identity and how it's important as and this wisdom investigation is important in order to create more compassion in the world. And I thought that was so interesting how Stephen Snyder connects that specifically with compassion practice. The other way that we can potentially create harm and that we want to bring compassion to is being the one that's the suffering one, right? Okay, so I'll just share a little mini story. So last July, I shared with you all that I was like on a month-long metta retreat, and it was great. And I saw a lot of things. But also on this retreat, I had a really painful physical injury happen. Just like spontaneously, I woke up in my bed from the retreat at the retreat center, and I didn't know it at the time, but later on I found out that two of my discs in my neck started bulging, and they pinched my nerve and they were compressing nerves in my neck, and it was so painful, like incredible amounts of pain, like definitely the most painful experience I've ever felt in my life. And I'm on a retreat. I'm on a meditation retreat. So this is that bitter medicine we're talking about, right? Just like, okay, you're on retreat, boom, go ahead, deal with this physical ailment, right? And of course, that's life. That's just what's supposed to happen. But I had to work with that pain in an isolated retreat setting. And I couldn't not work with it. Like, I couldn't not work with the suffering and the pain. And it was helpful. It's really helpful because I saw two things. One is the the sutta of the two arrows, right? There's pain, and then there's our relationship to pain. Pain isn't necessarily suffering. It's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, but everyone experiences pain. Suffering is the optional choice. We don't really have a choice about pain. It's there. It was an injury. It's there. But the suffering was optional. I could either choose to suffer or to bring compassion to it and be with that and transform that into understanding. Fortunately, I was on a retreat, so I did the second way. And one thing I noticed through compassion and through looking at suffering is that it's very easy to develop with intense suffering this idea that I am the victim, right? I am the suffering one. I'm the one that's in pain. I'm the one that's hurting. And this solidification of and this identity view actually contributes more to the suffering. And I was able to notice it, fortunately, and relax it, soften that, and recognize that the compassion, the karuna, gave me an opportunity to access the happiness that's built into the compassion. And I realized even though not ignoring the pain, not ignoring the injury, even though it was very intense and very unpleasant, I didn't have to act out this identity of the suffering one. I could just be happy, even though things were extremely difficult. I could be happy because I was choosing to be happy, because I wanted to be happy, because being happy felt better, being grateful felt better, being compassionate and equanimous and kind and loving and patient, it felt better. So it was really interesting to see that the wisdom aspect of when we bring compassion to our suffering creates space so that wisdom can function and we can begin to understand, how am I compounding this pain? How am I compounding this loss? We can't control the first arrow, but we can examine and uproot the second arrow. And we can feel the suffering, and we can feel the compassion, and we can see, like, okay, who is here that is experiencing the suffering? We can see that it's just another experience that life is showing and waking up to itself to understand and ultimately deepen our compassion and wisdom. So I'm finally healing from that injury. It's taken months and months of physical therapy and medication and patience and looking at my posture, but it is getting better. And ultimately, the healing process of my body has to take its own time can't really change that. I can do everything I can to help it, and I can bring water to the hell realm, right? I can go to PT, I can do all the exercises, but the real thing that I had the ability to do through my practice of compassion for myself was let go of the suffering through connecting with the compassion. And it really resourced me. It really provided refuge. And so we do that for ourselves. And as Stephen was saying earlier, our ability to connect with and understand our own suffering is the basis for us to connect with and understand the suffering of others. So it is the heart of the path. It is the heart of the path of understanding and finding freedom from suffering. So, um, thank you. I appreciate your letting me share this with you. Um, and I thought we could go ahead and meditate for the last, we can meditate for 10 minutes and we can close with our chant. And again, for compassion, generally, if we were to do the categories of people, we would do someone that we know is suffering first, because it's very easy to develop compassion for someone in our life who we know is suffering. So you can start with that person who you know is going through a difficult time, and that person might be yourself, and that's wonderful to give yourself that compassion. So it can just be like, I would say, because we're only going to do 10-minute meditation, I would say just choose like one person, or like one group of people that you feel like is like kind of more of like a group. You could do, or you can do yourself, just so that we are not spending the whole meditation thinking about who we want to think about. Go ahead and bring to mind one person who your heart trembles for. I also like that analogy from compassion. It's this quivering heart, this heart that is this feeling of closeness and being with, present with the pain and difficulty of that suffering person. Okay, so we're going to orient it to the compassion, having compassion for that person. So let's go ahead and find a comfortable seat. Allowing our eyes to close. Connecting with our own dear body. And then bringing to mind, to the forefront of our attention, a person, maybe ourself, or a distinct group of people that we know is experiencing difficulties and suffering. Having just a rough general feeling of who they are. And bringing this spirit of compassion, this sense of warmth, of caring, being with, being with them in the midst of the pain. We can say a phrase to help anchor our compassion. May you be free from suffering. And we hold this wish, not out of pity, but out of knowing and understanding that freedom is possible through being with this difficulty. So we can begin to relax our attention, allowing it to fill the borders of our body, noticing and feeling the resonance of the compassion in our heart. Noticing its wholesomeness, its tranquility, how reliable it is, how calming and soothing it is. Then, when you're ready, you can begin to gently open your eyes and carrying that resonance of compassion in your heart, that mind that is not suffering, but that is an aspect of wisdom, that is this compassionate heart. We can recite our metta chant. So I'll put the chant again in the chat for us. Let me open. Himaya Dhammanu Dhamma Patipatiya Buddhang Pujami Imaya Dhammanu Dhamma Patipatiya Dhammang Pujami Imaya Dhammanu Dhamma Patipatiya Sanghang Pujami Ahang Awero Homi Abhyapajo Homi Anigo Homi Sukiyatanang Pariharami Mama Mata Pitu Acharya Cha Natamita Cha Sabrahmacharya Cha Awera Hontu Aniga Paja Hontu Aniga Hontu Sukiyatanang Pariharantu Imasming Adame Sabe Yogino Awera Hontu Abhya Paja Hontu Aniga Hontu Sukiyatanang Pariharantu Ammakang Araka Dewata Imasming Vihare Imasming Awase Imasming arame araka dewata awera hontu abya paja hontu aniga hontu sukiyatanang pariharantu sabe sata sabe pana sabe buddha sabe pugala sabe atabhava pariyapana Saba itio, sabe purisa, sabe iti purisa, sabe anita purisa, sabe arya, sabe anariya, sabe dewa. Sabe manusa, sabe winipatika, awera hontu, abya paja hontu, abya hontu, sukiyatanang pariharantu. Dukkha muchantu yata lada sampatito mavigachantu kamasaka idang no punya bagang sabba satanang Bajema Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Let's dedicate so that may all beings be free.